Miriam, thank you so much for joining us from sunny Peterborough. You're not even in Peterborough.
No!
Start again. We've got to stop that.
Miriam,
That is the
thank
wrong
you so
joke.
much.
Okay.
Miriam, thanks so much for coming from the borough of Harrow. No, not that borough
No.
either. Kensington, Chelsea. From Middlesbrough.
Middlesbrough in the northeast.
Sunny Middlesbrough. And you brought the weather with you
Yeah, you're
to
welcome.
focus.
The north is gorgeous, yeah.
How has the travel been?
Oh, you
Was
know.
it a long one?
Well, a few trains, a few planes, a few donkeys. It's all the good stuff.
But you're here, and you spoke a couple of nights ago. Was it a couple of nights ago?
No, it was yesterday.
Yesterday morning.
Yesterday
Yesterday
Where were we?
morning.
Yeah, and you spoke all around the Great Commission, and why don't you just in a nutshell, like tell us a bit more about that? Like, when was it for you that turned from just kind of reading that, like most people read it, to actually thinking I'm going to take this pretty seriously?
Yeah, well, the Great Commission is just such a classic passage that helps you get fired up for sharing your faith. And then I avoided it for years. I preached it a lot when I was younger, and then I avoided it for most of my 20s because I thought it was a bit too obvious. And I just reapproached the scripture this year and noticed so many more of the nuances of the kindness of Jesus and the closeness of God and his invitation to join him because he's holding everything, all the authority's his, and therefore would you like to go and make disciples? And I think I'm just learning, the more you make disciples and participate in the mission of God in the world, the more you are being made a disciple.
Yeah.
So I pray that we become more like Jesus as we share Jesus. The more we're kind of generous with the good news to others, the more we realise not only is it good news, but Christ is actually forming me to become more like him, the God who gave himself away to all nations, the God who kind of therefore went, even to earth. So the Great Commission's taken on a real invitational and discipleship posture for me now, which I love.
Yeah. One of the things I love about you, Miriam, is you make evangelism or sharing your faith like really easy and really accessible. Because I think most people sometimes think like,
it's full of stadium.
oh, I've got to stand on a street corner and loudly yell in people's faces, which is terrifying.
It's just not the one.
Just not the way you do it.
No.
And I think one of the things that you show in your life, but also in the way that you preach, is just how like easy access it is.
That's great.
What does that look like in your own life? How have you learnt to kind of make that accessible?
I think evangelism isn't just a spiritual gift. I think it's just a spiritual discipline. So quite honestly, practice. So I just decided I'm going to do better at name dropping Jesus in my conversations, at owning my faith and telling the truth to my friends, and at offering to pray, because that's a much better offer than my own clever words. And so it's like exercise. The more that you strengthen a muscle, the more you do those repeated patterns, the stronger that you get. So mission and sharing Jesus is now much more instinctive simply because I practice.
Yeah.
I make sure that it's not an optional extra to who I am, but it comes out of me because Christ is in me. And so of course I'm going to tell the truth to my friends around what my job is, or my response. I got a phone call, a friend's parents super ill, they ring me, my response is prayer, even though they're not a believer, because I'm like, that authentically is what I would give.
Yeah.
I don't actually have anything else to give. So is that evangelism, or is that just being a good friend? Don't know.
Right?
And I remember you speaking years ago at something that I was at, and because of that talk, I then went and joined a football club.
Oh,
and
yes.
I wasn't a massive football player, but I just rocked up to a random field and just said, "Excuse me, could I play?" And it
That's
turned out to be an
amazing.
actual football team. And I had this one prayer that
Were
one
you
of
any
them.
good?
Yeah, I was alright. Anyway, that doesn't matter.
Medal for showing up.
That's not a point.
No, sorry.
But my prayer was that one person would come to church. And as I was chatting to the manager, I found out that he wanted to get married. So we
Cool.
married him and his partner, and
Wow.
the entire football team came to church, and then
This is so
they
cool.
heard the gospel. It was amazing. But
That's amazing
what
to
I
hear.
think so often people think when they think about evangelism is the filling of stadiums, the filling of arenas, having great words and all that stuff. And I think especially young people, they are so connected in terms of like social media and all that stuff. What advice would you give those guys who are like coming through the ranks, who are like saying like, I want to share my faith in really simple, practical ways? But how was it for you? What was like step one before like?
Yeah. Well, I think the age of the kind of Billy Graham mindset of filling stadiums and preaching with the Bible in the air, actually this generation and kind of our age groups, even because we're in the online space too, it's far more, even though it's a global reach, there's actually we're interested in personal connection, personal story, and just the genuine invitation of our everyday. And so, you know, for young people, even just the way that they authentically make sure they don't miss out their faith in what they share online. And if they're going to do Instagram stories, I hope they tell some really good stories of the things of God, the things they're wrestling with, the big questions that they've got. You know, if they are engaging in terms of trying to capture the beauty they see around them, I hope they give glory to the Creator around who created some of the sunsets that they want to capture.
Like
I think
quinoa salad and all that stuff.
You know, just
like
capture
Lord,
that
I thank
avocado.
you.
Capture the
Thank you
avocado.
for smashing the avocado.
And just lead in a
on
response
sourdough.
to Jesus. I think he is resurrected. When I eat avocado and poached eggs, I think the risen Lord is amongst us.
Yeah, can you imagine the testimonies of like leading people to faith over brunch? Where did you meet Jesus? Brunch.
Brunch. There'll be a load of them over a flat
Hollandaise
white with
sauce and the Holy Spirit. I just... who's planning that church? That's what I want to know.
Come on, let's get a bakery.
But I think keep it simple, keep it real, use your normal language, but it would be strange for you not to include who your best friend is and why you are who you are and whose you are. And so it's trying to just bleed through everything you do, the authenticity of who you are, which is wrapped up in who Jesus is.
Yeah.
So, and no shouting. There's no need, you know, when people are like, I don't know how to share my faith because I don't want to pressure people and I don't want them to feel like I'm shouting at them. And I went, I've absolutely no idea why anyone would think evangelism is pressuring people or shouting at them, because if it's a loving invitation to accept the God who already loves you, has already come close to you, it's not loving to pressurize somebody. You cannot control anybody. You cannot save anybody. And why would you shout? So let's just turn the volume down and raise the invitation and sit with one another and tell the truth.
And you apply that same stuff to personal spirituality as well, like making that dead simple. And again, I think again for young people, with everything so accessible, they want to be spiritual superstars from day one. And, and again, like for you, personal spirituality, what does that look like in terms of your daily, whether it's a daily routine or a weekly thing, or just like just rhythms of getting to know Jesus better? Yeah,
I think the grace that I've had is that I didn't really know the whole Christian conference thing was a thing. I didn't know women could teach the Bible. I was not aiming for any of this stuff that's part of my job and my joy, but I genuinely just try to follow Jesus every day. And so I spent up until the age of 20 doing that quite anonymously in terms of, you know, the way the Lord spoke to me most clearly growing up was through the Bible. So I just read the Bible a lot. I used to write a lot of poems that were like psalms. I didn't realise that journaling was a thing and that you could kind of hear the voice of God through how you just scribble out your thoughts and then write what you think he might be saying back. So that brought my faith alive, because I was like, I've been doing that since I could write. I just didn't know that was kind of wrapped in probably how David wrote a lot of the scriptures, as just processing his lament. And just even the discipline of thinking, I just remember thinking, what are we feeding? What are we taking in? And just making sure that I didn't get the loudest voice being the voice of the world, whether that was just listening to the charts the whole time, or whether it was just downloading and watching, even just TV shows and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but I just realised your diet will then affect how healthy you run. So just making sure every day I try to read a bit of the Bible. I try and read the Bible before I go to sleep to kind of just recalibrate and sleep with the peace of God, rather than be full of the narrative that I've probably been picking up all day. You know, and there's things like I do a retreat day once a month, which is part of Fusion, who I work for. Our culture is to take a paid day a month as part of our work to like rest and turn your phone off and turn your emails off and actually just talk to Jesus about our work and our identity and our purpose, and find rest outside of performance, because in a performance-driven culture, you're like, I've not been effective today if I've not done. And so just to kind of ruthlessly go for a walk in the countryside, read scripture and sit in silence in one place for 6 hours or something. It's both. I've been doing that for 8 years.
Wow.
So the discipline of learning how to be still for hours on end in front of a candle or something.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant, difficult and brilliant. So things like that.
That's beautiful. As part of your job, you spend a lot of time at Christian festivals like Focus and some others around the UK. What is so significant about setting aside this period of time, gathering together with other followers of Jesus? What do you see about these sorts of events and these sorts of times of gathering that's really significant in our own spirituality and life of discipline?
Well, I remember when I was 14 and I went to my first ever Christian gathering, like conference setting. It was the only one I went to, and then the next time I went, I was an adult and speaking in it, so it was like a bit of a shock. But just walking into a context where there were thousands of people also following Jesus. When I grew up in tiny churches in rural settings, when I was the only one in my year group, in my youth group, or there's one other Christian in my class, and that was like the other one in the year. And so just to go, oh gosh, there's more of us.
Yeah.
It was such a relief, because I was like, I know that we're not like loads, but just to be encouraged that it's not ridiculous to follow Jesus as a teenager, or it's not ridiculous to actually try and walk out the way of Christ as a young adult, but to go, oh, actually there are family members around. Like, that's so encouraging to faith. And of course, there's no way that we are thinking our festival mountaintop moments are going to be the other 52 weeks of the year. Like, of course not. We don't set an expectation for our local gritty everyday community in our church as being these moments. But the people of God for generations have gathered together in huge numbers to worship God, to contend for his presence to come, and to see across communities what God's doing amongst the people. And then they've scattered back into their little settings. And so that's really lovely. That's a real encouragement of the water's being drawn in before you'll rush back out again, hopefully with more inspiration, more courage, knowing we're not alone, and getting to hear from voices that we wouldn't otherwise hear from. But just even the sound and the sight of masses of people worshipping, it's just a nice little taste of heaven that gives you a taste for heaven, isn't it? So it's worth it just for that.
Yeah, that's good. What's Jesus speaking to you about at the moment? Like, what is the message on your heart? You shared a little bit in the big top, but for you personally, like, what are you mulling over and thinking about at the moment?
Oh, I'm always mulling and chewing.
Like a good wine.
I'm just always sort of letting it, like a cow in a field
with a
glass of wine. I don't think that's how it works. So, I'm asking myself big questions. I live in a community that's of high social deprivation and addiction. So in one sense, I'm wrestling with the big questions of what kinds of churches are we going to need to reach the people on the estate who I live amongst, who know more about the generosity of the gospel than most people I know, but don't always fit into our existing church context. So I'm asking those kind of questions. I'm sort of crafting at the moment a message around friendship, because I am convinced that we are desperately in need of better friends. Yes. Like biblical, lay down your life for your friends. That call is, we desperately need it in the church, because we need to learn how to disagree well, and we don't. We need to learn how to offer people different options for relationships outside of romance, and we're not sure what to do. We need to offer children a safer home and community, and biology isn't enough in terms of even the family unit. And I'm like, kingdom friendship keeps coming up time and time again as ways in which we have stronger bonds in the family of God beyond biology or romance. But the world idolizes romance. The church can often trip into also idolizing the family unit in its biology rather than household, which is biblical. And so I'm really chewing through what the call to friendship looks like. Lay down your life for your friends. So that's in my head at the moment, and it's currently out working in some teaching that I'm crafting right now. So we'll see.
Well,
coming to a festival near you.
Yeah, I know. That's a little promo for you.
So good. And I'd love to know, like, some of the ingredients in your life, especially growing up. We're launching Focus Alive next year. But what are some of the ingredients of your kind of teenage years as a Christian, growing up, as you said, in these rural churches?
Yeah.
What were some of the ingredients that really kept stuff going for you?
I actually was privileged enough to actually quite enjoy my teenage years, and that isn't every teenager's story, and I do not belittle how tough it's getting in order just to navigate being you in the online space, and just to even get a break from your friends because they can access you the whole time, and just doing school and the pressures that are involved in that. But for me, I had a female youth worker called Vicky who was utterly for me, even in my failures, which meant that when I would mess up royally and make stupid decisions, there was no way I wouldn't tell Vicky, because there was no way she wasn't the approachable big sister character to say, this is, I like this boy and I don't know what to do, or I've really messed up that decision, or I think I've fallen out with my friend about that, So role models that are just slightly ahead of you, that are approachable, that helped, given that I didn't have loads of Christian friends. A solid youth worker was super helpful for me. And just trying to be as honest I could be. So I just made some decisions really early on that I just wasn't going to do what everyone else was doing around just getting drunk at house parties. And that was kind of happening from about the age of 14. And just making some decisions early rather than experimenting with everything and then deciding to swim back later, which was often the story I heard. As a teenager, I'd here are all the mistakes I made, but now I know Jesus was right around self-control, around honouring one another, and so I've come back to this. And I thought, I'm going to try and live the story where you don't have to go away in order to authentically come back, but you can just be with him and work out how to be in the party but shining something different. Work out how to be a good friend without always being the same as your friends. Work out how to do relationships without thinking the way to validate that relationship is physically to give everything as they ask. And just navigating that minefield as a teenager, to do that all with Jesus. I'd never actually heard that testimony. I used to think I had a boring testimony because I never walked away from Christ until my late teens, early 20s, and I thought, gosh, that is just a huge work of grace. And in fact, I need to tell parents that. Like, you can actually see your kid not walk away and still have an authentic faith in Jesus. You can't be an evangelist without a ridiculous story of, I was in prison and now I'm an evangelist. I'm like, they're phenomenal. That just makes no sense for me. I played the violin and, like, basically got one detention in my life.
What for?
Talking in science.
Come on, science.
Always talking.
Yes.
Always
I can
talking.
see that about you.
What an idea. And then I had a huge debate with my science teacher, who was from the Muslim faith, about religion for the whole detention, and the rest of the detention room were fuming. So they were like, Miriam, I'd rather write lines than listen to this discussion. I was just like, what about Jesus, though? What a nightmare. Give me another detention for that, honestly.
Well, I've known you for a few years, and the first thing, I don't know if you remember, you probably wouldn't because it's so inconsequential, but the first thing you ever said to me was in a prayer meeting, and you came up behind me and you said, at least look like you're having fun. And
Did I actually?
You did.
I am sorry.
No, but one thing I love about you
outrageous.
is you don't fear telling the truth and calling Christians into more and saying that actually as a church we have a mandate and we need to pull our socks up and get on with it.
Come on.
What gives you that courage? What gives you that boldness? Who is around you that's saying,
I did that.
go on Miriam? I flipping love it.
He tells everyone that story.
It doesn't look like you're having fun.
But since
we need
then,
that in a
all
prayer
the time
meeting.
at prayer meetings now I'm like this as I come in. Like,
Fake it till you make it.
this is Miriam said.
That's brilliant. Again, it's grace, isn't it? I deeply know who I am in Jesus. And I've been working on, even in the last 2 years, again, working out what does it mean to fear God? Because if you fear God, you don't fear man. So it is an ongoing process for me to learn what it means to have the fear of God and therefore not the fear of man. And I'm a recovering people pleaser. So I've also had to learn over my 20s around how to love people well doesn't mean you do everything they ask. And let your yes be yes and your no be no. And in order to give well and be compassionate, you need some real strong boundaries. Otherwise, you just burn out. I mean, I've got a strong mother. I've got a long line of strong women in my family. They're like, my grandma is a warrior in prayer. And she said to me, Miriam, if I'd have been born earlier, I'd have been a suffragette. If I'd have been born later, I'd have been Prime Minister. But I was born when I was born, so I pray. I was like, come on, April Glennie, you babe.
April.
So, yeah, what a legend. So I've got some fiery women in my life. My mum was an amazing head teacher before she retired, like would turn around schools, like phenomenal woman that would champion the underdog. So I've been raised with this heart for justice and this heart for actually stand your ground. Because actually it's not really okay, some of the things that go down. But stand your ground. And so that's helped. But I'm also just, the more you see Jesus, the more you uncompromisingly know life to the full. There is a greater invitation on our story. And I just think he really is good news. I really think he's good. And I really think he's close. And so I genuinely try and live like it. And then when I see brothers and sisters that I'm like, I think he's closer than you think. I think he loves you more than you realise. And I think you're worth more than perhaps you know. There's no way I wouldn't say. So.
Well, you're a huge inspiration and an encouragement to me, to Alex, in his own prayer life, in prayer meetings. And
look like you're having fun.
And
so sorry.
We're just so thankful for everything that you've given this week, Miriam.
No, well, I love
Focus. Thanks so much for
the
coming to the Focus Live Lounge, and we hope to see you again.
Yeah, no, I love you guys, so it's going to be great.
Have a great week.
Cheers.
So good.